Hey, it's good to have you here. So, one of my close friends recently started trying for a baby, and watching that journey up close, I realized something I hadn't really thought about before: how fragile, confusing, and deeply personal fertility can be. We live in a world where science can move mountains, but when it comes to creating life, the road is still unpredictable. And that got me thinking, what have people always done when faced with infertility? What lengths would they go to? What strange beliefs did they hold on to when medicine didn't have answers? So today we're not diving into a crime scene or courtroom like we usually do. We're going somewhere even more human, more raw. This is a story about fertility, told through ancient rituals, bizarre remedies, and the science that changed everything. And trust me, it's weirder, darker, and more emotional than you might think. This is True Crime Echoes. Chapter 1: The Oldest Desperation. You know, it's strange. The more I learn about history, the more I realize how deeply human desperation runs, how timeless it is. We think we're so advanced now with apps that tell us when we're most fertile, or clinics where science can do what nature sometimes can't. But the truth is, for thousands of years, people have been trying anything, literally anything, to have a child. And I get it. There's something profoundly emotional about the desire to bring life into the world. It goes beyond biology, it's legacy, it's hope, it's the need to feel like you were here, and that a piece of you will stay long after you're gone. But if we think today's fertility hacks are strange vitamin gummies, Mucinex, TikToks, ovulation trackers, we really haven't seen anything yet. Because if you look back, like way back, some of the earliest civilizations were already obsessed with fertility. And what they tried, it ranged from beautiful and spiritual to absolutely bizarre. Let's start in ancient India. We hear Kama Sutra, and most people instantly think sex positions, flexibility, some kind of adult gymnastics. But the Kama Sutra wasn't just about pleasure, it was actually considered a guide to fertility. Yeah, that's right. Ancient Hindu belief systems tied everything from food rituals, even the positions themselves, to the act of conceiving a child. They believed that sex, when done with intention and spiritual awareness, could invite the gods to bless a couple with children. And temples weren't shy about this. Some were literally covered in carvings of people having sex because the act itself was seen as sacred, not vulgar, not taboo, but divine. It's wild to think how differently we view things now. We hide intimacy, we cover it in shame or embarrassment. But in those days, fertility was life, and life was everything. Now, let's go a little west. Ancient Egypt. These people were serious about their gods, their rituals, and their fertility. One of the oldest fertility rituals I came across was something called anoserma. I know the name sounds like a skincare product, but the ritual, it was anything but. According to legend, there was a day when the sun god Ra was in a terrible mood, like celestial level bad vibes. The goddess Hathor, who represented love, motherhood, and joy, decided to cheer him up. And how did she do that? She lifted her robe and flashed him. Yep, she mooned the sun god, and apparently, it worked. Ra was so delighted by the sight of her exposed body that his mood changed entirely, and he blessed the world again with light and warmth. From that myth, a belief was born: if you wanted to bring fertility into your life, into your community, into your crops, sometimes you just had to bear it all. It wasn't just some symbolic gesture either. This act, literally flashing the gods, was believed to awaken the forces of creation. It was practiced in ceremonies. Women would lift their skirts toward the sky or toward the fields to encourage the blessing of life. As outlandish as it might sound today, to them it was sacred. It was powerful. And Egypt didn't stop there. They had another method that honestly blew my mind, because it's a little strange, but surprisingly kind of scientific. If a woman thought she might be pregnant, or was trying to find out if she could even conceive, there was no doctor to call, no test to pee on. So, they improvised. Here's what they did. They would literally pee on a handful of wheat and barley seeds. Just straight up water the grains with their urine. Then they'd leave them out for a few days to see what happened. If the wheat sprouted, it meant the woman was likely carrying a girl. If the barley sprouted, it meant a boy. If nothing sprouted, then it was believed she either wasn't pregnant or, sadly, maybe couldn't get pregnant at all. And here's the kicker: modern scientists have actually tested this, and it turns out there's a little truth to it. Pregnancy increases levels of estrogen in the body, and estrogen can, in fact, stimulate plant growth, which means that somewhere in the middle of ancient myth and ritual was the beginning of real biochemical testing. These women were running fertility experiments thousands of years ago, long before science gave it a name. And it wasn't just about women either. Back then, even without modern medicine, people understood that men could struggle with fertility too. If a couple couldn't conceive, it wasn't just the woman who got tested. The man would pee on the grains too. And if nothing sprouted from his sample, the issue might have been on his side. Now, I'm not saying we should all start peeing on wheat fields again, but the fact that they thought of this with no microscopes, no hormone strips, no knowledge of estrogen, that's pretty incredible. It's a reminder that desperation and innovation have always been closely linked. When the stakes are high enough, people get creative. And when it comes to bringing new life into the world, the stakes have always been high, because behind every ancient ritual, every strange test, every whispered prayer to the gods, there was someone hoping, praying, desperate to create something lasting, a family, a legacy, a life. And that desperation, it only gets stranger from here. Chapter 2. When Rome Ran Wild. The more I kept digging into the past, the more I realized there's this recurring theme in history where people treat fertility like it's both a sacred gift and a terrifying mystery. And nowhere is that more obvious than in ancient Rome. Now, the Romans were a lot. Like, if you think modern celebrations are over the top, baby showers with matching pastel themes, gender reveals with fireworks, then let me introduce you to the festival of Lupercalia. Lupercalia was kind of like their version of Valentine's Day, but way more chaotic. There were no chocolates, no roses. Instead, men, usually young priests or festival participants, would run half-naked through the streets of Rome, waving strips of goat skin. And the purpose? To whip women. Not in a violent way, at least not in theory, but symbolically. It was believed that if a woman was struck with one of these goat hide strips, she'd be blessed with fertility and easier childbirth. Yeah. That was considered romantic, and women actually lined up for it. Not because they were into pain or spectacle, but because they truly believed, that a swift tap from a sacred goat strip could be the difference between a childless life and becoming a mother. That tells you something about the desperation and the hope. This wasn't just pageantry, this was real for them. But Lupercalia was just the public side of it. When you went behind closed doors, fertility advice got a whole lot weirder. There was this guy named Pliny the Elder, kind of like the Wikipedia of ancient Rome. He was a naturalist, a philosopher, a writer, and he wrote this massive book called Naturalis Historia. And people took this book seriously, like gospel-level seriously. In it, he wrote about everything from astrology to animal behavior to, you guessed it, fertility. One of his more questionable suggestions, drinking urine, specifically the urine of a eunuch, a man who had been castrated. Pliny believed that eunuch urine had medicinal qualities, and in the context of fertility, he wrote that if a woman drank a small amount of it, it could help her conceive. And people didn't just read this and laugh, they did it. Because when Pliny spoke, ancient Rome listened. Now I know what you're thinking, that's disgusting. And yeah, it is. But when you're out of options and all you want is a child, logic kind of takes a back seat. People will try anything, and Pliny just gave them a roadmap. And if you couldn't get your hands on eunuch pee, don't worry. Pliny had backup plans. According to him, urine from horses, bulls, and even wild boars could also be helpful, not just for fertility, but also for increasing sexual desire. Imagine that. You're sitting at home, your partner comes in like, "Hey, I picked up some boar pee today. Thought we could spice things up tonight." The thought is ridiculous now, but back then it was taken seriously. There weren't clinical trials or FDA approvals. There was plenty of quill and a lot of creative confidence. But here's the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. Why would a society that produced some of the greatest thinkers, architects, and generals believe that drinking pee could help you get pregnant? Because even for all their advancements, Roman roads, aqueducts, military strategy, there was one thing they still couldn't fully understand: the female body. Women's reproductive systems were a complete mystery, so people reached for whatever they could: myths, magic, sacred rituals, or livestock urine, whatever made sense at the time. And honestly, that part hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. Even now, when science has evolved beyond what Pliny could ever imagine, women are still being handed half-truths and weird miracle hacks when it comes to fertility. It might not be bull urine anymore, but it's not that far off. So when I read about these ancient Roman beliefs, I wasn't laughing. I mean, yeah, some of it is absurd on the surface, but underneath the absurdity is a truth that still resonates today. The longing to become a parent can push people to believe, to sacrifice, to hope beyond reason. And that's why I think these stories matter. Not because they're funny or strange, but because they show us just how far people have always been willing to go to bring life into the world. And trust me, ancient Rome wasn't the only place where people were drinking questionable things for the sake of fertility. Because halfway around the world, in China, people were eating something that might be even stranger than urine, but we'll get to that in a minute. Chapter 3: The Price of a Promise. When I was researching fertility rituals around the world, I expected to find a lot of oddities, potions, chants, maybe some superstitions passed down through generations. But what I didn't expect was bird spit. Yep, bird spit. But in China for centuries, this wasn't considered strange. It was considered sacred and expensive. And depending on who you ask, miraculous. It's called edible bird's nest, and I know that name sounds like it belongs in a weird culinary trend from a food festival. But this has been around for over 1,000 years, and it wasn't made of twigs or feathers. These nests were spun together using the saliva of a tiny bird called a swiftlet. Here's how it works. The swiftlet doesn't gather sticks like most birds. Instead, it flies into dark caves or cliffside crevices, finds a safe spot, and begins to build its nest strand by strand using nothing but its own spit. Over time, that spit hardens into this translucent white cup-shaped nest, and that's what people were after. Now I know this sounds absurd, but in traditional Chinese medicine, these nests were believed to be powerful. They were said to nourish the yin, which is the feminine energy in the body, linked to things like fertility, menstruation, and childbirth. So for women hoping to conceive bird's nest soup wasn't just food, it was a ritual. They believed it could prepare the body for pregnancy, keep the baby healthy, and even help the mother recover faster after giving birth. And if that weren't enough, it was also said to preserve youth and promote longevity. Basically, it was the ancient version of a wellness smoothie, except made from cave spit and worth more than rent. And it wasn't just for anyone. This was a luxury item often reserved for emperors, royal families, and the extremely wealthy. There are records of Empress Dowager Cixi, the most powerful woman in late imperial China, eating bird's nest soup every single day. She believed it kept her skin smooth, her body strong, and her mind sharp well into her 70s. And back then, living into your 70s, that was basically a miracle. But here's the thing that no one really talks about. Collecting these nests wasn't easy. You had to climb sheer cliff walls or crawl into deep, dangerous caves. And most of the time, people didn't stop to check whether the nests were empty. So in their rush to gather these magical ingredients, a lot of baby birds and eggs were lost. Entire generations of swiftlets just gone, all for the hope that a few spoonfuls of soup might bring someone a child, or keep them young for a little longer. Eventually, people realized that this wasn't sustainable. So instead of climbing cliffs, they began to build bird farms, massive concrete structures designed to attract swiftlets indoors, making it easier and safer to harvest the nests. These days, bird spit is harvested in sanitized rooms, soaked, cleaned by hand, and sold for thousands of dollars per pound. It still takes hours of labor to prepare just one batch. And yes, it's still a booming business. You can find edible bird's nest in everything from beauty masks to protein powders. I've even seen bird's nest drinks in fancy wellness stores sitting right next to the collagen shots and sea moss gel. And here's the kicker. It doesn't even taste like anything. People who've tried it say it's bland, kind of like gelatin, but nobody's buying it for the flavor. They're buying it for what it represents: a promise of youth, of fertility, of a future that feels just a little more in reach. And honestly, I get it. When you want something badly enough, especially something as emotional and as life-altering as having a child, you'll reach for whatever gives you hope, whether it's a lab-developed hormone or a bird nest that took weeks of spitting to build. But it's not just about tradition, it's about control. In a world where our bodies sometimes betray us, or where time feels like it's slipping away, these rituals, these strange, sacred, sometimes heartbreaking rituals, give us something to hold on to. A belief that maybe, just maybe, we're not entirely powerless. And that idea, that belief in something beyond biology, that's what keeps these traditions alive. Because even though science has made incredible strides, people still want that extra push, that one ancient remedy, that rare ingredient, that last hope. And in the caves of Southeast Asia or the high-rise bird farms of modern China, people are still chasing it. But this obsession with fertility and control doesn't always come from hope. Sometimes it comes from fear. Sometimes it turns dark. And in one small Japanese village, it led to a legend so strange and unsettling that people are still talking about it centuries later. And yes, it involves demons. Chapter 4. The Demon Within. There's something haunting about the way folklore holds on to truth. Not the kind of truth you find in textbooks or courtrooms, but the kind that reflects our deepest fears, our quietest anxieties. Sometimes those stories are cautionary, sometimes they're survival guides, and other times they're a strange mixture of both. That brings me to one of the most bizarre and honestly unforgettable fertility legends I've ever come across. It comes from Japan, and it's been passed down through generations, mostly by word of mouth. There's no name for the woman at the center of this story. She's just the woman with the demon inside her. According to the legend, she was young, sweet in love, newly married, and ready to start a family. Everything seemed perfect, but when she and her husband tried to consummate the marriage, something went horribly wrong. He died, not from illness, not from violence, but from the most unthinkable injury. His genitals were bitten off. And no, this wasn't a crime of passion. According to the story, a demon was living inside her vagina, and when her husband came too close, it attacked. At first, the woman didn't even understand what had happened. She was grief-stricken, humiliated, and terrified. People in the village whispered. Some said she was cursed. Others thought she might be possessed. But either way, she was alone. And still, somehow, she fell in love again. This time they waited. They got married. They tried to be careful. But the same thing happened. A second husband. The same terrifying end. After that, she was desperate. She didn't just want to be loved. She wanted to be normal. To have a family, a life, something safe, something human. So she went to a blacksmith. Now I know that sounds like a strange turn. But back then, when you didn't know what was happening inside your body, you went to the people who understood metal structure and defense. She believed something sharp lived inside her, so she sought someone who knew how to forge protection. And the blacksmith came up with a plan, one that sounds both terrifying and brilliant. He forged a metal phallus, and she used it the way you're probably imagining. When the demon tried to bite again, its teeth shattered. And just like that, it was gone. Freed from the curse, she went on to live a normal life. She married again, this time without tragedy, and she finally had the children she always dreamed of. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The villagers were so moved by this woman's story and so impressed by her bravery that they enshrined the iron phallus. They literally placed it in a shrine where people could come and pray for fertility, safe childbirth, and protection from evil spirits. The shrine still exists. It's called Kaneyama Shrine, located in Kawasaki, Japan, and every year on the first Sunday of April, people gather there for one of the most unique festivals in the world, Kanemaru Matsuri, or the Festival of the Iron Phallus. It's exactly what it sounds like. There are giant penis floats, Penis-shaped candy souvenirs, costumes, you name it. It's playful, it's loud, it's joyful. But at its core, it's deeply rooted in something dark and personal, a story of a woman who lived in fear of her own body, who believed she was cursed, who fought to reclaim control over her life. And maybe that's why people still show up not just for the spectacle, but for what it represents. Because for centuries, women were told that if they couldn't conceive, it was their fault, that their bodies were broken, that they were cursed. So they looked for answers in myths and rituals, in iron tools and whispered prayers. Even now, in the middle of a colorful street festival, you can feel that tension, the celebration mixed with sorrow, the humor hiding a deeper hurt. And honestly, that feels familiar, because whether it's bird spit, goat skin urine, or iron phalluses, the core of all these stories is the same: a longing to be whole, to be chosen, to create something that lasts. We laugh at the demon story now. We parade statues down the street. But for the woman who lived through that myth, real or not, it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. And it was all too real. And maybe that's why the story survived. Because there's something universal about fearing your body and trying to find a way to love it again. But while some legends turn into festivals and shrines, others quietly shape the future through science, medicine, and unexpected breakthroughs. Because just a few decades ago, in a quiet lab in Italy, another fertility story was unfolding. One that didn't involve demons, but nuns, mice, and 30,000 liters of urine. And this time, it changed everything. Chapter 5: The Holiest of Experiments. You ever come across a story so bizarre, so oddly specific, that you have to stop and ask, wait, is this real? That was me when I found out that the modern fertility revolution began with nuns. Yes, nuns. And not just that, nuns and 30,000 liters of urine. It sounds like a bad joke or a strange historical rumor, but it's actually one of the most quietly incredible chapters in medical science. The story starts in the 1950s in Italy with a man named Dr. Bruno Lunenfeld. He was an endocrinologist, someone who studied hormones and how they affect the body, and he had a singular obsession trying to figure out why so many women couldn't get pregnant. This was post-World War II Europe. The world had just come through devastation. Millions of lives had been lost, entire communities erased. And countries were desperately trying to rebuild not just their cities, but their populations. So fertility wasn't just a private matter. It was political. It was national. And Dr. Bruno, he was on a mission. Now he could have taken the traditional path charts, interviews, theoretical studies. But instead, he went all in. He got curious about urine. Yeah, I know. He had this theory that postmenopausal women who were no longer fertile, might still hold important hormonal clues in their bodies, specifically in their urine, because when a woman hits menopause, her body ramps up production of certain hormones to try to keep things going. It's like a biological Hail Mary. So Bruno starts collecting urine samples from older women painstakingly day after day. And then he does something kind of wild. He starts injecting the urine into mice. And suddenly the mice started ovulating, like aggressively. Their ovaries went into overdrive. And that's when he realized he'd found something. Inside that urine was a hormone called HMG, or human menopausal gonadotropin. And this hormone could literally jumpstart ovulation in women who struggled to conceive. It was a discovery that could change lives. But there was a problem. To get even one single dose of this hormone, you needed urine. A lot of it, like gallons. And not just any urine, it had to come from postmenopausal women, and it had to be clean. No contamination, no inconsistencies. So, where do you find a large group of postmenopausal women who are medically stable, living similar lifestyles and willing to give daily urine samples? For Bruno, the answer was simple: Catholic nuns. It was honestly kind of genius. These women lived in communal settings, didn't drink or smoke, followed routines, and importantly, weren't sexually active, which in hormonal terms meant less fluctuation, more consistency, so Bruno reached out. And over the next year, more than 100 nuns agreed to participate in what would become one of the most unusual and generous contributions to modern medicine. They donated their urine day after day, month after month. And in the first year alone, Bruno and his team collected over 30,000 liters. Just from that, they were able to produce 9,000 vials of a new drug. It was called Pergonal, and it would become the first widely used fertility treatment of its kind. This was the beginning of hormone-based fertility therapy, and it was made possible by science perseverance and the quiet cooperation of women whose names were never published in journals or headlines. But here's what stuck with me most. This didn't feel like a sterile lab experiment. It felt intimate, personal, sacred even. These women weren't just part of a study. They were helping give life to others literally. And the Vatican, surprisingly, they were on board. The Pope himself gave the blessing for the program because, after all, helping Catholic families grow aligned with church values, even if it involved nun pee. It's weird, right? The same institution that would later condemn things like IVF and birth control actually supported this strange little chapter of reproductive science. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was about control, or maybe deep down they knew how badly the world needed healing. But still, it made me think. This was the first time in the story where science, religion, and womanhood all collided, and instead of conflict, there was harmony. Women who couldn't conceive were finally given an option, an actual medical option that didn't involve praying to gods lifting skirts or eating bird spit. And that changed everything. But science didn't stop there. Because a few years later, another group of doctors would push the limits even further. They wanted to do something no one had ever done before: create life outside of the human body. And what came next would spark moral panic, religious outrage, and a media firestorm that circled the globe. The first test tube baby was coming, and the world wasn't ready. Chapter 6. The Baby in the Dish. Sometimes the biggest revolutions happen in the smallest rooms. In the late 1970s, inside a quiet lab in England, a group of doctors were trying to do the impossible. They weren't looking to pray to gods or interpret ancient rituals. They were trying to create life using science, and not just by helping people get pregnant. I mean, literally creating life outside the human body. This is where we meet two names that deserve to be remembered: Dr. Patrick Steptoe, a gynecologist, and Dr. Robert Edwards, a physiologist from Cambridge. Together, they were chasing a dream that most people at the time called insane, or worse, unnatural. They believed it was possible to take an egg from a woman's body, fertilize it with sperm in a lab, and then place the fertilized embryo back into the uterus to grow. No sex, no intercourse, no sacred act of conception. Just a dish, a microscope, and a prayer. And for years, they failed. More than 80 procedures. 10 years of trial and error. Mockery from peers, suspicion from the press, funding issues, and always the same painful result: no pregnancy, no baby, until 1978. That's when they met a woman named Leslie Brown. She had been trying to conceive for 9 years with no success. She and her husband John were willing to try anything. So when Dr. Steptoe and Dr. Edwards told her about their experimental procedure, something no human had ever successfully gone through before, Leslie didn't hesitate. She said yes. They extracted one of her eggs, mixed it with John's sperm in a petri dish, waited, watched. And when the embryo began to divide, they implanted it back into her womb. That was it. No guarantees, no certainty, just hope. And then it happened. Leslie got pregnant. I can't even imagine the emotional weight of that moment. Not just for Leslie and John, but for the doctors, the nurses, the researchers who had poured a decade of their lives into this one fragile chance. But here's the part that gets me. They kept it a secret. For months. Because they knew what was coming. And they were right. As soon as the news broke, the world lost its mind. Headlines called her a test tube baby, which, by the way, isn't even accurate. She was conceived in a dish, not a tube. But you know how the media works. The point was, people were freaking out. There were religious leaders saying it was playing God. There were politicians calling for bans. There were scientists raising ethical red flags. And the general public, they were split. Some were amazed. Others were horrified. People started asking wild questions. Would IVF babies be normal? Would they be soulless? Would they grow up sterile? Would they even be fully human? There were even rumors that the baby would glow in the dark. I wish I was kidding. But through all the fear and speculation, Leslie stayed calm. She carried her pregnancy to term, and on July 25, 1978 in Oldham, England, she gave birth to Louise Brown, a healthy 6-pound baby girl, the world's first IVF baby. And she was perfect. No horns, no glowing skin, no missing soul. Just a baby. A miracle. Born not of magic or myth, but of science and perseverance, and the unwavering belief that biology could be bent, but not broken. Still, the backlash didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. Religious leaders condemned the practice. The Catholic Church, which had previously supported the use of fertility hormones like Pergonal, the one made from nun urine, suddenly drew the line. IVF, they said, separated reproduction from the sacred act of sex. It was unnatural, immoral, even murder in some cases because IVF often involves creating multiple embryos, and not all are used. But here's what they missed. IVF wasn't about defying nature. It was about restoring hope. It was about giving people, especially women, a chance to experience motherhood when everything else had failed. And Louise, she grew up. She went to school. She made friends. She had a completely normal life. And later, she became a mother herself. The girl who once symbolized the end of the world ended up raising a family of her own. I think that's the part that hits me most. We feared what we didn't understand. We called it unnatural. And yet today, millions of children have been born through IVF. We don't think of them as lab experiments. We think of them as people, as family. But back then, none of that was guaranteed. All anyone had was trust. Trust in science, in ethics, in a mother's love for a baby she hadn't even met yet. And it worked. But of course, progress comes at a price. IVF was, and still is, incredibly expensive. Not everyone who needs it can afford it, and not everyone who tries succeeds. So once again, people began turning back to alternative treatments. Ancient remedies, TikTok hacks, vitamins, supplements, rituals, anything to make that one dream come true. Because as far as we've come, that deep human longing to create life, it's still here. And it's still complicated. Chapter 7, The Business of Hope. You'd think that after all we've learned after test tube babies, hormone therapies, IVF decades of science and sacrifice, we'd finally have it all figured out. That fertility would be something we could control, manage, fix. But the truth is, we haven't found the magic solution, and in a way that's what makes the story so human. Even with billions of dollars in research and technology, getting pregnant is still a mystery for so many people, and the more I looked into it, the more I realized. We've traded in ancient rituals and folk legends for something just as powerful and just as complicated, a $40 billion global fertility industry. That's where we are now. Apps, hormone injections, vitamin blends, at-home fertility tests, ovulation trackers. Private clinics that promise high success rates if you can afford them. This whole space has exploded in the last decade. In 2023 alone, fertility services were valued at over $42 billion. And by 2030, that number is expected to pass $70 billion. That's a lot of zeros attached to something so personal. But here's the thing, it makes sense. Because even though we have more information than ever, the pressure to conceive and to do it on a timeline has only gotten heavier. Women are waiting longer to have children, career, stability, finding the right partner, just life. And then suddenly your doctor says, you should have started 5 years ago. It's like there's this invisible clock, and the moment you hear it ticking, you'll do anything to stop it. So people turn to products, tests, procedures, promises. I've seen fertility kits that cost hundreds of dollars, but look like Instagram unboxing packages, pretty colors, calming fonts, even little mantras printed on the boxes. You're powerful, you're ready. And I get it, I really do. When something is this emotional, you want every piece of it to feel hopeful, beautiful, clean. But underneath the pastel packaging is still this haunting truth. It doesn't work for everyone. You can do everything right, eat the right foods, take the right supplements, time everything perfectly, and still face heartbreak. Because no matter how advanced we get, we can't control everything. We can't force biology to comply. And what's worse, most of it isn't covered by insurance. In a lot of countries, fertility treatments are still considered elective, optional, which honestly feels like a slap in the face to anyone who's ever wanted a child and couldn't afford to chase that dream. I've read stories of people going into debt, selling their homes, emptying their savings accounts for a chance. Not a guarantee, just a chance. And when it doesn't work, there's grief, shame, guilt, like your body failed you, like you failed yourself. And then the cycle starts again. You buy a different supplement, try a different clinic, another round, another test, another hope. It's a lot. And I think that's why so many people still turn to unconventional methods. Maybe not goatskin festivals or iron phallus shrines, but definitely the modern version. Drinking herbal teas someone swore by on Reddit, swapping Mucinex stories on TikTok, whispered advice in fertility forums about pineapple cores and Brazil nuts, and keeping your feet elevated after sex. Because even now, with all the science, we still cling to rituals. We still search for meaning in the randomness. We still hope there's anything we can do to tilt the odds in our favor. And honestly, that's not crazy. That's human. Because wanting to create life is one of the most powerful, raw, instinctive desires we have. And when that doesn't come easily, it shakes everything. Identity, relationships, faith, self-worth. It's not just about babies, it's about what those babies represent: hope, continuity, the belief that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And when you realize how much money is being made from that hope, it forces you to ask some hard questions. Are we supporting people on their fertility journeys? Or are we selling them dreams with expiration dates? Are we innovating for the future? Or are we monetizing desperation? Because make no mistake, there's beauty in the science. IVF, IUI, surrogacy, egg freezing, they've changed lives. They've brought joy where there was once despair. But there's also a danger in treating something as sacred as life, like a product. And I think that's where we are now, standing in between science and soul, between ancient fears and modern medicine, and between what we can measure and what we can't. So yes, maybe we're not flashing the sun god anymore or drinking unicorn pee, but we're still trying, still believing, still chasing that miracle, one test, one injection, one embryo at a time. Because no matter how far we've come, we're still asking the same question we always have. Can I bring life into this world? And what am I willing to do to make that happen? Chapter 8, Full Circle. Looking back at everything we've covered, the ancient rituals, the urine tests, the blacksmith-forged iron phallus, the hormone breakthroughs, and the billion-dollar fertility industry, it's easy to feel like we've just taken a wild, bizarre, even ridiculous ride through history. But under all the strangeness, under all the superstition and science, what we've really been tracing is hope. That's the through line. It always has been. Hope that a higher power might hear your prayer. Hope that something inside you still works the way it's supposed to. Hope that one day you'll hold a child in your arms and think everything I went through was worth it. We've dressed that hope in 1,000 different costumes over the centuries. We called it divine. We called it medicine. We called it fate. We tried potions and rituals, prayers and needles, spit and steel and science. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. But we tried, because the desire to create life isn't just about reproduction. It's about meaning, about connection, about not disappearing when we're gone. And that part that hasn't changed at all. Even now, with all the advancements we have, we're still struggling with the same emotional terrain, the same fear, the same shame, the same quiet comparisons we make when everyone else seems to be announcing pregnancies while you're just waiting. Still waiting. We like to think that history is linear, that it moves forward one miracle at a time. But the truth is, it loops. It circles back. It repeats in new costumes. The same way an ancient Egyptian woman lifted her skirt to the sun god Ra, a modern woman might light a candle and whisper into the void after her third failed IVF cycle. The same way a Roman wife drank urine with trembling hope, someone today stirs maca powder into a smoothie and tells herself this is the one. It's not silly, it's not weak, it's human. And I think we forget that sometimes. In a world that constantly tells us to optimize, to measure, to outperform, there's no data point for grief, for longing, for the ache of something you don't have but can't stop hoping for. And so we try. We keep trying. With every new piece of technology, with every whispered remedy, with every chapter of this long, strange, beautiful story. Because even if we never find a guaranteed way to create life, we will always find a reason to believe in it. So wherever you are on this journey, whether you've lived it or living it or love someone who is, I hope this story reminded you that you're not weird, you're not broken, you're part of something ancient and ongoing and deeply, deeply human. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. So yeah. From flashing sun gods to injections made from nun urine, we've seen how far people are willing to go for something as simple and as impossible as a child. And while the rituals have changed, the longing hasn't. We're still whispering into the dark, hoping someone or something is listening. And in that way, maybe we're not so different from the ones who came before us. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of your own journey, or someone else's, feel free to share it, or just sit with it. Sometimes that's enough. Thank you for spending your time here with me. This has been another chapter of True Crime Echoes, where even the stories that don't make headlines still leave a mark. Until next time, take care of yourself, and be kind to your body. It's carrying more than just biology. It's carrying hope,